My name is Paul Gentry. My connection with meningitis B is that my 16-year-old daughter Izzy, she died from meningitis on the 20th of May 2016.
I'm Kerry McCarthy. I'm the Labour Member of Parliament for Bristol East, and that includes the St Brendan Sixth Form College, where Izzy and George were both pupils. So 2 pupils there have died of meningitis B in the last 18 months. That's the main reason for my interest in this. In terms of parliamentary activity around meningitis, there was a huge petition early 2016. At the time it got more signatures than any other petition, certainly any other health-related issue. And there was a parliamentary debate in April. The government's response was non-committal in terms of rolling out vaccinations, but they did embark upon a review. We're still waiting to hear the outcome of that review. What it really comes down to, as with so many issues, is whether it's going to be cost effective to introduce, and whether we can persuade the government that, vaccinating to potentially save young people's lives is a price worth paying. Obviously, I believe that it is a price worth paying. More recently, Prime Minister's questions, I raised the case of Izzy and of George.
In the past 18 months, 2 students from St Brendan Sixth Form College in my constituency, Izzy Gentry and George Zagrafu, tragically died from meningitis B. The free vaccinations for babies introduced 2 years ago are of course very welcome, but came far too late to save Izzy and George. So will the Prime Minister do more to raise awareness of meningitis and extend free vaccinations to today's teenagers, which is the group that after babies is most at risk?
The point I was trying to make is that although that will protect the teenagers of the future, it doesn't protect today's teenagers. My colleague Jim McMahon, who's an MP for Oldham, he has a case in his constituency of a 6-year-old that died recently, so he also pressed the Prime Minister on the same issue, and the outcome of that is that we're going to have a meeting with the Secretary of State for Health quite soon.
My daughter Isabel, she died in 2016 from meningitis B, and it was confirmed by a specialist that if she had been given the meningitis B vaccine, that she would have survived, or she would not have contracted the full disease and would be alive today. What I would like to see is for the meningitis B vaccine to be made readily available to 14 to 24-year-olds across the country. Currently, it's just the ACWY vaccine, which is just as important because it covers different strains. My ambition is twofold, is to highlight and get the awareness for the ACWY, and also to progress for a vaccination programme for meningitis B.
I actually got an email within a couple of hours of Prime Minister's questions finishing, offering me and Jim a meeting. We asked whether we could bring along parents or relatives of our constituents, and they said yes.
It's a really busy time for Parliament, and there's so many issues going on, and to try and get a campaign into the limelight, an important campaign for many, it was reassuring to see that you took it to the table, and to see the response from Theresa May, and I'm looking forward to meeting Jeremy Hunt and to discuss the issue. In a real world, we'd like it to happen overnight, but we know that it's going to probably take a couple of years or so to actually progress things, but it's essential that we keep it in the limelight.
One of the reasons why I told the Prime Minister's office beforehand that I was asking this question is because I really don't think this should be a political battlefield. There will be MPs on all sides of the House from all parties that have constituents that are affected, and that's one of the things I really want to do now, is to try to build a bit of an alliance with those MPs as well, so that it's not just Jim and I that are asking Jeremy Hunt to take this more seriously.
As you're aware, I had a couple of letters from Jeremy Hunt after I wrote to him following Isabel's death. The second one that I received there was some reassurance in there, and I know from actions that he's mentioned that there has been some positive reviews that have come about, particularly at the BRI. So again, that was reassuring, and to see things actually moving on, it is really important, and it reassures not just myself but other families that have been affected as well.
I mean, I think there are several elements to it, aren't there? One is raising public awareness so they know if a child or indeed an adult is showing the signs of suffering from meningitis, that they can treat that seriously and get them to hospital. The other thing, as unfortunately was the case with Izzy, that the hospital and the health service have to know those signs and respond quickly as well. But then the vaccination is the ultimate goal.
I know in the case of Bristol Royal Infirmary, they've actually changed protocols. They actually used Izzy's case as a training case for the medical staff to highlight the issues in relation to meningitis, because obviously we've had several cases in Bristol, and fortunately 2 of the cases actually survived, and that was very recent. But it also highlights, in particular with relation to George, he was treated in another hospital in another area, and symptoms were missed. And I think, it is imperative that we continue highlighting the awareness to families, but we also need to push for additional training across the UK, because it is a national health service, and it would be nice to see that they're all singing from the same hymn sheet, to coin a phrase. I had a contact from one of my friends who said that his son, he wanted to get meningitis B vaccine for his son, that he was going to pay for. But when he contacted his doctor said, there isn't a meningitis B vaccine. It hasn't been developed yet.
Right,
said, so I can't buy it privately. And he said, no, there isn't a meningitis B vaccine.
Yes.
Yet you can go to Asda or Boots and buy the vaccine if you want to.
That's quite worrying if the GP is saying that it doesn't exist.
And that's what it seems to be like. And to me, as I said, it's a national health service. And it seems to vary between
there shouldn't be a postcode lottery.
It's like between health trusts, the information that gets out, how they treat patients differs, when really you'd think there'd be a uniform.
So spreading awareness and making sure that when the first instance, those organisations that might be the first point of contact with someone showing symptoms, whether it's a pharmacist or the GPs or then schools, to make sure that they are up to speed and they know firstly what the signs are, what the risks are, but also then enrolling then in promoting the vaccine. If that's one good thing can come from what happened to Izzy and George, it is the fact that but people like you speaking out, and it's really brave of you to do that. I mean, that does help raise awareness and hopefully mean that other people are prevented from going through the same thing.
And likewise, seeing yourself and your colleagues bringing it up in Parliament, that sort of reassures us in that it is important, because people say, well, actually they're discussing this in Parliament. And it might go quiet for a while, but then it sort of escalates a bit, then goes quiet again. So obviously we're trying to keep it in view all the time. And that's what I will do. It may go quiet, but all of a sudden I'll pop up and say, don't forget this.
We'll have the meeting with Jeremy Hunt. We'll see what he says. But I would like to, and I'm sure Meningitis Now will be able to play a key role in this, in identifying MPs across the political spectrum that are willing to speak out. There were people that spoke in the debate in 2016. Maybe by spring 2018 it'll be time to revisit the issue, once the government has finally published the review that is being carried out. But there are ways and means that we can try to keep the spotlight on this issue.
It's like the ball has started to speed up again, and that's what we'd like, is to keep it rolling.
I think it's just important that it hears from the families that have been affected. I think that's the first thing, is just to plant in the health secretary's mind, this is what happens if you don't vaccinate, and hopefully we'll get some answers about where they are with the review, whether there's any, whether they are seriously looking at rolling out vaccination, and perhaps a bit of a steer as to, if they express reservations, which buttons we need to start pressing to try to get them to change their mind.
I can't bring Iz back, we can't bring George back, but likewise we don't want to see other families go through that. And it's going to be expensive to do a vaccination programme, but then when you look at the costs of the treatment, the care that somebody needs when they contract meningitis, and the ones that survive can be mentally scarred for the rest of their life, they can be physically scarred, they can lose limbs.
Yes.
And it's the ongoing care and cost to the NHS for those people for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
So when you take that into consideration, as well as families being distressed and living the rest of their lives in grief, even though we'll get on and with our own lives, we'll still have that pain for the rest of our lives. And I think when you put that in context with the cost of the vaccine, that it's a price worth paying for the vaccine.
There's so many different areas that you point to, particularly in the public health sphere, that if we were to invest up front, we would save the system a lot of money, as well as saving families griefs, and other issues that would flow from not acting now. So I think that's the case that we've got to make to the Health Secretary when we see him, that, don't just look at the cost of the vaccination, look at what that would be offset against.
What would be your hopes for Bristol and Swindon and the South West? If you could implement something, is there anything that you would like to try together to try and raise awareness?
In the last few days, I've been contacted by people that are involved in the public health side of things, and some of the councillors. So our Deputy Mayor, she's already been involved in discussions, but very keen to do more to increase awareness. The universities, I think, are really important places as well. I know Dr. Dominique Thompson, who's head of GP services at the university. She was the first person to raise this with me several years ago about trying to get take up of the ACWY vaccination. Actually, I think we need to look and see whether there's more that we can do on that front.
They've never apologised properly about Isabel's death, and to me that is more important than anything else. From Jeremy Hunt's second letter, it sort of highlights about the hospitals being more open with families in in these sort of loss of life issues, not necessarily meningitis, but across the board, if there's a death in the hospital, how it's investigated and how they should be more open.
They do have a responsibility to the patient's family to be as open as possible.
And despite the fact of the coroner saying, well, you have been neglectful, they sort of still said, well, we're sorry what happened to us, but we did everything we could.
Right. And it's a lot for a family when you've already had the grief surrounding Izzy's death to then feel like you're banging your head against a brick wall trying to get answers on it.
It's like I said to the solicitor, it's not about the money. I don't care, I don't need the money. I don't want it. It doesn't give me my daughter back. She's worth a lot more. Well, she's priceless. All I would, that's like I said to the solicitor, I said all I want as a settlement is for them to admit their liability, say that they were wrong, and as a result of that, we've done this, this and this. Yet they still go down the avenue of, we haven't done anything wrong.
Yeah.
And that is quite, to me, that's disrespectful to Izzy's memory.
I think it's really important that that aspect of it, that what you're having to go through now, is flagged up with the Health Secretary. It's always quite difficult from my point of view if somebody in my constituency has died in circumstances that means there's publicity around it. I don't want to be the MP that jumps on the bandwagon and that tries to make the story about me and sort of knocks on the family's door. You're always very hesitant. Sometimes, I might write to the family and say, I'm very sorry if I can be of any help, but sometimes it's quite difficult to track down the family. So when the family feels that they are ready to talk about it, or friends of George and that, I've been talking to some of them on on social media, if they, it's quite easy to find out who your MP is and to lobby them and to try to see if they will ask questions and just help raise awareness as well. And most MPs, they want to be asked to do something. It's not just they want to be told there's a problem. If you can say, therefore, I would like you to write to Jeremy Hunt and ask him whether he will roll out MenB vaccinations or something like that. That's always good, because then we feel like we're actually being useful rather than just sort of being sympathetic.
For me, it was going to the website and seeing the information, seeing how that there was other families that were affected, not necessarily through losing a child, but somebody who's severely handicapped, physically and mentally, was to go there knowing that there's people you can talk to. And I think it's an important sort of step, because you're like in the middle, you're there to give support, to give information and advice. And I think with me, it sort of determined where I was at, so then I could speak to the media and to yourself. Once that had gone and we'd got some answers, you sort of think, well, what's the next thing? And that's when I moved on then, right? And I think I did I put in to do some charity events.
Yeah, you started doing walks.
Getting involved
did 3 peaks, didn't you? And
yeah. Gone mad again for next year. It's like doing the charity events. It's a challenge for me, and it's sort of raising vital funds, but it's also the awareness side of it.
Pleasure to meet you, even though it was in these circumstances. It's the start of working together and hopefully achieving something.
Brilliant. Thanks very much.